Few terms lend themselves to the fear-mongering market quite like artificial intelligence, both because of its real game-changing potential, but also because of how it's long been presented in pop culture. When most people hear artificial intelligence, they conjure images of the Terminator wiping out humanity, or the machines from the Matrix using human beings as batteries. But as we've discussed in past videos, that isn't what current state AI is. Now, if you want to learn more about how the AI systems in development for the military actually work, we've got videos on that. But today, I want to talk about the AI apocalypse that I actually am worried about, and it's got nothing to do with software run amok. You see, America's largest and most powerful geopolitical adversary, the industrial juggernaut that is China, is working frantically to close what they perceive to be a strategic gap between the level of AI technology found in the United States and the systems they're developing themselves. And it's in this rush to be first, or at least not to be last, that my AI anxieties really start to bubble to the surface. Because I'm not scared of AI going rogue, not anytime soon anyway, but I am scared of what could happen if that rush results in artificially intelligent war machines doing exactly what they're built to do, but at the wrong time, in the wrong place, or to the wrong people. So let's talk about AI's growing role in the future of warfare and how it doesn't need to go rogue to lead to our doom. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Air Power. Over the past few years, we've talked a lot about the US Air Force's ongoing and ominously named Skyborg program, which is actively working to develop artificial intelligence agents, as they're called, that are capable of piloting fighter aircraft in complex air combat operations. While some of this effort's roots reach back decades, it really began garnering media attention just about 5 years ago now, with DARPA's Alpha Dogfight trials that saw an AI agent designed by Heron Systems dominate a human fighter pilot in virtual dogfights for the very first time. Now, 2 years later, in December of 2022, those AI agents made the leap out of that virtual environment and into the real world, after being integrated into the Air Force Research Lab's unique and heavily modified Block 30 F-16D, known officially as the X-62 Vista. In the 3 years since, these AI agents have piloted the X-62 through increasingly complex air combat exercises, and by 2024, then-serving Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall revealed that the AI-piloted fighter was already demonstrating an arguably even level of combat prowess with seasoned fighter pilots more than a decade into their flying careers. And today, the hardware required to turn a fighter jet's controls over to AI is actively being installed in another half-dozen combat-coded F-16s out at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, as a part of what's known as Project Venom, or Viper Experimentation and Next-Gen Operations Model. Now, unlike the test-oriented X-62, these in-service F-16s come with a complete suite of combat sensors, including an advanced active electronically scanned array radar, allowing the AI agents to mature their combat capabilities while drawing data from the full breadth of sensors available in current generation tactical aircraft. And as these AI agents continue to mature in F-16s, the Air Force recently began ground testing the world's first pre-production fighter drones, or drones designed specifically for air-to-air combat. These jets, General Atomics FQ-44 and Anduril's FQ-42, are expected to begin flight testing later this summer. And the Air Force has previously announced plans to purchase at least 1,000 fighter drone wingmen, including these and other designs, within the next 5 years or so. Originally, the goal was to provide just 2 drone wingmen to each of 200 new F-47 air superiority fighters and 300 new Block 4 F-35s, but more recent testing has revealed that both the cognitive load and the system complexity required to coordinate and control drone wingmen in combat are actually a lot lower than previously anticipated. Exactly how many drones could operate alongside a single fighter remains classified. But in January of 2025, Lockheed Martin CEO Jim Taiclet announced that they had already demonstrated the ability to control 8 combat drones from just a single F-35. Now, this effort isn't just about sticking AI into drones and finding ways for humans and machines to work together in the fight. It's also got the long-term goal of fielding an advanced AI co-pilot for American aircraft that can handle many of the more monotonous tasks associated with complex flight operations, freeing up the pilot's focus for, more pressing combat matters. And of course, the Air Force's Skyborg program is only one of a long list of artificial intelligence-centered efforts underway within America's sprawling defense industrial complex. In part because, AI is such a broad and all-encompassing term at this point that it's used to describe everything from advanced targeting algorithms and missiles to eyeliner filters on TikTok. But also because the Pentagon is already savvy to a reality that many of us outside the confines of its conference rooms aren't. That AI is not the future of warfare. It's the present. And a winning AI strategy, effectively employed, could genuinely be the deciding factor in a large-scale conflict between 21st century powers. Or, to put that another way, there is a reasonable argument to be made that the nation that uses AI most effectively in the 21st century will eventually emerge as the dominant power in the 22nd. And that could honestly be a problem for Uncle Sam. Not just because China's invested massively into its academic and R&D infrastructure in recent years, as America has continued to let its own atrophy, but maybe more importantly, because China's AI efforts aren't hindered, hampered, or otherwise held back by the same ethical concerns American democracy demands that we address. But having an advantage doesn't guarantee victory, and in fact, there's growing evidence to suggest that while America is afraid China might surpass it in the AI arms race, China sees things very differently. It's important to understand that America's AI efforts have not been maturing in a vacuum. And in fact, Chinese defense and academic circles have been closely observing America's AI progress for years now. In a March 2025 paper penned for the Oxford Academic by Jinggan Zhang, the chair of Lancaster University's China and International Studies arm, Zhang highlights China's response to recent American AI breakthroughs. I'll quote him now. From the technological breakthrough of Google DeepMind's AlphaGo to the birth of ChatGPT, AI progress in the US in both the civil and military spheres has repeatedly shocked China's strategic community, leading to reflections on its own perceived, quote, backwardness. Zhang points out that in America there's growing fear of losing the AI race, and in fact, many even argue that America already has, but that perception is not reflected in the reality of Chinese academic journals. As Zhang puts it, quote, Chinese literature focuses, at least for now, on narrowing the technological gap between the US and China in the military arena. In his analysis of some 140 Chinese academic papers about AI, he found that roughly 64% of them centered on the United States. But this last quote from his paper is what really caught my attention and prompted me to start working on this video. When discussing the breadth of academic papers written by AI researchers in China since 2016, Zhang notes that, and I quote, the strategic discussion on AI in the military domain typically involves proponents of its potential. However, a few express cautions regarding its military applications. And there's the rub. China began to invest very heavily into AI starting in 2016 and continues to work under the assumption that it is lagging behind the United States in terms of applying this emerging technology to military applications. As Zhang puts it, this has created, quote, strategic anxiety within China's defense apparatus, creating a growing sense of urgency. Now, this conclusion was also mirrored almost a year prior in a report published by the Center for Security and Emerging Technology, which analyzed 130 Chinese language academic journal publications from between 2020 and 2022. They also found that the majority of papers discussed China's growing concerns that they are lagging behind American AI progress. And to some, this might sound like good news. After all, it seems to confirm that the United States does still maintain the technological edge in this field. But it's also important to understand the power that strategic anxiety, as Zhang put it, can have on a nation's defense endeavors. After all, there was a time when the United States kept nuclear-armed bombers in the air 24 hours a day, every day, despite the immense cost and risk in doing so, just in case the Soviet Union got froggy. And that same sort of Cold War thinking could see China opt to circumvent ethical norms in favor of fielding AI capabilities that can defeat or deter America's military, even if they aren't truly mature enough to do so without putting non-combatants at risk. Now, that's a claim that does require some justification, because I'm not just saying China would be willing to skirt past ethical concerns for the sake of deterrence, military capability, or even just good old-fashioned international prestige just because I'm a pro-American simp. China has a well-established history of prioritizing progress, or even just the illusion of it, over principle. One 2024 paper published in the academic journal Nature found that the global paper publishing giant Hinduai, which owns some 250 different academic journals, issued more than 9,600 retractions worldwide in 2023. And more than 85% of them, some 8,200 retractions, had authors or co-authors in China. Now, that same paper found that across the entire academic journal printing industry in 2023, some 14,000 retraction notices had to be issued specifically and only to Chinese authors. Now, China has, of course, made efforts to curb ethics violations and fraud in its academic infrastructure alongside its rapid military expansion. But to date, it seems that China's drive to set itself apart as a global technology leader and to overcome America's technological advantages, even if only in the perceptions of the world, still take precedence over legitimate efforts to rein in Chinese academia. China's willingness to ignore ethical concerns in its research endeavors is so widespread and well understood that it even resulted in a new term being adopted by the European Commission back in 2020. That term is ethics dumping, which is used to describe researchers who intentionally circumvent the legal ethics requirements of their own countries by exporting their projects to China. Now, some well-known examples of ethics dumping outlined in a 2023 paper published by the National Institute of Health's National Library of Medicine include testing genetically modified foods on primary school students without disclosing it to the students or their parents, surgically implanting unproven medical devices, including artificial hearts, into unknowing patients, and maybe most notable of all, a 2018 case of a scientist modifying the genes of 3 human embryos that later resulted in the world's first 3 genetically modified human beings being born. Now, I want to be clear that American academic and defense research efforts are definitely not without their own scandals, and the Western world has lots and lots of scientific skeletons in its closet. But when it comes to AI, the United States may be in the lead, but it's also been much more direct in its efforts to codify international norms regarding its ethical use, especially in warfare. In 2022, Gregory Allen, the Director of Strategy and Policy at the DoD Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, outlined America's extensive efforts to address the risks inherent to AI, including commercial partnerships for testing, releasing AI ethics and principles guidelines, updating DoD safety standards, and funding a long list of AI reliability and trustworthiness research projects to assess the efficacy of AI models. He outlined how the March 2021 National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence report called for direct diplomacy with China to discuss AI's impact on, quote, crisis stability, and how several academic papers that followed, published by both American and Chinese researchers, echoed this same sentiment. But as Allen recounts, during his tenure with the DoD, they attempted to broach the topic with the Chinese military on at least 2 separate occasions, and both times they were swiftly rebuked. Now, from a Chinese standpoint, rationally, knowing that the United States has worked to curb China's AI advancements, it isn't surprising that China wouldn't be particularly interested in engaging in an ongoing dialogue about the ethical use of this technology. But the absence of direct diplomacy, nonetheless, does very little to assuage that strategic anxiety that could motivate China to integrate AI into systems as aggressively as possible to close that perceived strategic gap. But by now you may be asking, so what if China, or anybody else for that matter, wants to rush a half-baked AI model into military service, or to put AI war machines on the front line without direct human supervision? If these systems don't work as intended, won't that negatively impact China more than its adversaries or anyone else? And the answer to that is, well, unsurprisingly, complicated. Because the ethical employment of AI on the battlefield isn't always necessarily the most efficient use of AI, meaning ignoring ethical norms could actually result in a battlefield advantage for China, rather than the other way around. But the real risk associated with rushed AI compounds the higher the strategic ladder its digital tentacles reach. With AI agents in development that are designed to provide options to commanders in the fight, and others meant to assess and respond to threats even faster than humans can themselves, there is a high likelihood that artificial intelligence will soon be either making kill suggestions or even kill decisions all on its own. And with that comes the distinct risk of unintentional escalation. So let's start on the lower risk end of the spectrum, how disregarding ethics in AI could result in a tactical or even strategic advantage for China. All the way back in 2012, the Pentagon issued DoD Directive 3000.09, entitled Autonomy in Weapon Systems, with the stated goals of establishing policy and assigning responsibility for the use of automation in weapons and armed platforms, creating guidelines to minimize the chances of accidental engagements, and creating work groups to continue to mature DoD policy on the matter. But from a more bare-bones practical standpoint, this regulation requires that a human operator must be in the loop for all engagements, or kill decisions. Now, this is a seemingly common sense approach to using AI in warfare, but objectively speaking, it does mean using human operators as an intentional roadblock between opening and closing an automated kill chain. There is no question that networked computers and sensors could locate, identify, and engage targets more rapidly than human operators could, and waiting for a human to give the go-ahead, which wouldn't always be necessary but certainly would be in most circumstances, represents a manufactured delay in closing that kill chain. If China's AI-powered frontline combat systems aren't hindered by the need to loop a human into the decision to pull a trigger, but America's all are, well, you can imagine how that amounts to a disadvantage for Yankee bots, and could push the United States toward an equally irresponsible policy, all for the sake of curtailing China's advantage. But the risk of giving AI the authority to pull triggers extends way beyond making sure it's choosing the right targets. It's just as important to consider the circumstances of an engagement. As we've discussed in the past, even the most advanced AI models still struggle to make good decisions when presented with a glut of seemingly related but ultimately unimportant data, which would be well, the norm anytime two national militaries are operating in proximity with one another. Humans, of course, are very good at absorbing, contextualizing, and disregarding both verbal and nonverbal information, but machines are not. And leaving the decision to fire up to a machine alone might well result in the first shots of World War III being fired not because of geopolitics or the failure of diplomatic process, not because of fear or malice, but simply because a machine, working within the black and white parameters it was provided, chose to open fire, knocking down the first in a long line of kinetic dominoes that humans may not be able to stop before they cascade into an open and bloody conflict. And then, of course, there's the risk of integrating AI into networked strategic weapons, like nuclear missiles, to enable or expedite command decision-making, or worse, to serve as a sort of dead man switch that would allow for retribution even in the worst-case scenario. But I don't need to delve too deeply into this idea because, well, you guys are all probably pretty familiar with how bad a nuclear war could be. Artificial intelligence is already at the heart of countless military efforts for nations all around the globe, but the truth is, we're still a long way off from knowing what the full extent of AI's infiltration into our defense apparatus will ultimately be. On a long enough timeline, AI of one sort or another may be so commonplace that we come to rely on it in the same way we've come to rely on previous technologies like GPS, networked connectivity, or radar. And that genuinely may not be a bad thing. But the risks associated with AI and the concerns that I have about China's military AI endeavors are very real. And they aren't the ones I always see people talking about in the comments. Whenever we discuss AI, people immediately start acting like the computers themselves are going to turn on us, and that the war I should be worried about is one between us and the machines. But that's not what would happen. The artificial intelligence systems in use today just aren't capable of going rogue any more than the ECU is in your Honda Pilot. No, the AI we need to be afraid of isn't a computer that decides to kill us. It's a computer that was taught to, that's operating exactly as it was intended, and is lacking in the safeguards necessary to differentiate between civilian and combatant, between legitimate threats and military posturing, or to understand that a war avoided is always better than the cold arithmetic of a war won. Because to a machine, losses are just data points. But to us, those losses might just be the people we're fighting for. And with that ends yet another edition of Air Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to check out sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and now merch from all around the force. If you've got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.